This is the story of how I became a sugar baby. You see, I was born into a rich family. My dad gave me everything I asked for, until one time the police came to our house and took all of our possessions. I was so angry with my dad because he never told us that we were $3 million in debt. After that, we had to move to a homeless shelter because we had nowhere else to go. I hated it there. I couldn't stand this life, so I decided I was going to do something about it. First thing I did was I started working at the theater. I was selling popcorn for $7 an hour. The money I was making a day wouldn't even cover my lunch, but I had no choice. Money became so tight that I was forced to start selling my things to survive. First, I sold my expensive designer dress, and then a bag, and eventually I ended up sitting on the street corner, surrounded by the things I used to own, trying to sell them. Soon after, I got fired from my job at the theater because I couldn't keep up with the demands, and selling my things on the corner of the street became my full-time job. I often just slept there too because I hated going back to the homeless shelter and seeing my father's face. Until one time, I felt a hand grabbing me in my sleep, and I woke up immediately. When I looked to see who was there, I saw an old man standing in what looked like a designer suit with a cigar in his hand. I asked him how did he get a suit like that? He must be rich. He was impressed that I knew the designer. He said he felt bad for me, sleeping on the street corner like that, and he offered to help me. I thanked him, but refused to go home with a stranger. He then made a phone call and said that he wasn't going to take me home with him if that scared me. Instead, he booked me a room at a 5-star hotel and drove me there in his limo. When we arrived, he took me to my room and confessed that he thought I was a beautiful woman, and a beautiful woman as myself should never be on the streets like that. He then kissed me on the forehead and wished me a good night's sleep. I was amazed. I guess that my boob job, perfect gym body, and face fillers from my good days still did the job. I woke up the next morning to a letter from Tom saying that he was waiting for me in the lobby. When I found him, he took me in his limo to a really nice restaurant and we had breakfast. "You don't seem that impressed with the fancy lifestyle for a woman who is homeless," he told me. So I told him my story, how I was rich like him once, and how we lost all of our money because of my dad's stupidity. Tom seemed touched by my story and offered to be my sugar daddy because my own father failed to take care of me. I agreed without knowing what a sugar baby is. And when I asked him about it, he said he'll explain later. We went back to the hotel and he started showing me all the things he was willing to buy me. He also promised me $10,000 a week. This was even better than the money my dad used to give me. But when I asked him what do I have to do in return, he said that I had to be his girlfriend. "What about the ring on your finger?" I asked. "Are you married?" He said that his wife was an old lady who he can't stand anymore and that I should not worry about her. I didn't really want to say yes to becoming this guy's sugar baby. I mean, he was like 30 years old, but I also hated the idea of going back to live on the streets like a homeless person, so I agreed to these terms. After that, Tom bought me my own apartment and car. They were both fancy and I loved them. Unfortunately, a thank you wasn't enough, and I had to give him something back in return. I kissed him, wore pretty underwear for him, and did everything he asked for, but at the time, all of that seemed like it was worth it. Tom never slept at my apartment though, because he had to go back to his house to see his wife and kids, so I slept alone every night. When I told Tom that I was lonely, he got me a puppy and named him Alfredo, even though I wanted to name him Munchkins. And since that day, I started to notice how bossy and controlling Tom was. I began to really hate him. He started asking me to change myself slowly. I only wore the things he wanted me to. It was all pretty clothes, and after a while, he thought that I should get another boob job because my implants were too small, as he described it. And on top of that, he made me dye my hair blonde. Basically, I was a prisoner living a luxurious lifestyle. It didn't make me happy. When I wanted out, Tom demanded that I'd pay him back every penny he spent on me, and then I could leave. But in reality, that was impossible to achieve. Until one day, I was sitting in a cafe and a guy came and started hitting on me. He said that I looked so hot, and then he asked if my breasts were natural. I was furious and told him to go away. Eventually, we got into a big fight, and that's when I had no other choice but to call Tom and ask him for help. But when I did, Tom told me, "You look like a hoe. Why would anyone treat you any differently?" He then added that he was too busy for the BS, and he hung up. I didn't want to seem weak in front of everyone, but tears started falling down my cheeks uncontrollably. But then I felt a hand grabbing me, and when I looked over, I saw that it was the barrister who sold me my coffee. "Come with me," he said, and he took me to the back side of the cafe. This guy's name was Edward. He dried my tears and listened to me as I told him about the guy. He was a pretty good listener, so before I knew it, I started telling him about Tom and then my story as a sugar baby and what had happened with my father. We spent hours talking, and I could swear that for the first time, I felt like someone really actually cared about me. Edward took my number and said that he'll call me and help fix my problem. At night, I waited for Edward to text me, but he never did. I went to bed at 2 a.m. knowing that no one really cared about me in this world. I was just a bimbo whose whole life relied on men to provide for her. I wished that I could be my own self and independent. I slept that night hugging my pillow and crying, but when I woke up, I saw a text from Edward that he sent at 3 a.m. It said, "Sorry, Hannah, but I was stuck at a late night shift. How are you?" I was happy that Edward texted me. I sent a text back, and since that day, I started texting him all the time. He told me that he likes kids and that he loved traveling. He was very intellectual and read a lot of books, and most importantly, he had a good heart. After months of texting, I decided to meet up with him behind Tom's back. I would see Edward every other day, and the more we met, the more I fell for him. I wished that I could run away with Edward somewhere far away, but he didn't have enough money to support both of us, and I wanted to work, but if Tom found out, he would probably kill me. Until one day, I decided that I wasn't going to let Tom stop me from doing what I wanted to do anymore, and I decided to start working with Edward at the cafe without Tom's knowledge. And it felt great. I started saving the money that I was making, and it made me feel good about myself. Soon enough, I wasn't spending Tom's money anymore, which meant that I was on the way to becoming independent. But my bad luck struck again, and I found myself facing Tom one day at the cafe. I never expected him to buy his coffee from a place like this, so I never planned how I should react in a situation like this. When he saw me, he was very angry. He then told one of his men to escort me to my apartment before I could even say goodbye to Edward. His guy took me with him and drove me back to the apartment and left me there, and took the keys. When I searched for my phone, I found out he took that too. I had no cell or Wi-Fi connection anymore. Tom had basically cut me off completely from the outside world, and I had no way out. For the next week, I was in the apartment with Alfredo all alone. No one came to visit me, not even Tom. I felt like I was about to go insane, but after 7 days, I was surprised to see Tom visiting me. He gave me a hug and said that he missed his sugar baby. Then he started asking why did I do all of that stuff behind his back, and what was it that bothered me, as if he cared about my well-being at all. I tried to act nice to him, in hopes that I would persuade him to let me go, but as soon as he left, he locked the door behind him and left me in my prison again. I couldn't live like this anymore. I felt like I was about to go insane. I started hitting the door trying to break it, but instead I broke my arm. I was in so much pain I couldn't even breathe, but I wasn't about to give up. I wrapped my arm in a bedsheet and grabbed the biggest chair I could find in the apartment and smashed the window. I struggled to get out, but when I did, I headed to the cafe I used to work in and I looked for Edward. But when I saw him, he was holding another girl's hand. I slapped him on the face and called him a cheater in front of everyone and left the cafe. But after a few minutes, I noticed that Edward came and sat beside me and gave me a big hug. He said that he was sorry and that he thought that I had left him, and he's been so upset about it. I decided to forgive him, but then he revealed to me that he had already gotten that girl pregnant and that he had to stay with her to raise the baby. I was devastated, but that wasn't gonna let me give up and go back to Tom. I started working at that cafe like I used to, and I would see Edward and his pregnant girlfriend flirting with each other at the cafe every day. She was a total hoe if you ask me, but I was determined to stay strong until one day, a guy with a suit came to the cafe and asked me out for a date. I was hesitant about going out with more men, but it was hard for me to see that Edward had moved on with someone else, so I agreed. Luckily, that guy was very rich, but he wasn't anything like Tom. He bought me everything I wanted, but he also loved and cared about me. I guess you can say that he was my lover and sugar daddy at the same time. As for Edward, well, he would see my new boyfriend at the cafe and get really jealous, but I didn't feel sorry for him. Did you like my story? Please share your thoughts down below and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Toby and I met when we were 13, and we became best friends almost instantly. When we were 15, we decided to start dating. I am on the school hockey team. That was where I met Jason. He was in the year below me at school, but he was so tall and strong, with dazzling eyes. I couldn't help but blush when he came to sign up. Over the next few weeks, Jason and I spoke more and more. We held hands, and he told me he loved me. He told me to break it off with Toby and asked me to be his girlfriend. I didn't know what to do. It was coming up to summer vacation, and I told Jason I would end it with Toby. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kept putting it off. I saw Toby a few times during the holidays, but it felt strange and fake. Worried that he was suspecting something, I told him that I loved him and arranged for us to go out to dinner. At dinner with Toby, I left to go to the bathroom, but when I came back, he had my phone in his hand. Jason had messaged me whilst I'd been gone, and Toby had seen it. I burst into tears, trying to deny it, telling him I was sorry, that it had been a mistake. He walked out of the restaurant. When I went back to school in the fall, everyone knew what had happened. Jason wouldn't speak to me anymore as I had lied to him, and nor would Toby. It has been 2 months now since that happened, and people don't really care about what happened anymore. Life is back to normal, except Toby is not in it.